Hello. My name is Evangeline Ellery. And I was erased. Not forgotten. Not overlooked. Erased. I gave $90,000 to my sister. She used it to build a company, then sent me a fake invitation to her launch party, so I'd miss it. And when I opened that mailbox, that's the moment everything shattered. The morning air felt colder than usual when I stepped out of the car, the kind of cold that didn't bite, but lingered. The sky over Portland carried that gray tint of early winter, soft and indifferent. I'd just returned from a week-long work retreat, spreadsheet debates, polite laughter, hotel coffee that never tasted right. Normal life. Predictable. Safe. Until I opened my mailbox. There it was, a sleek white envelope with gold lettering. My sister's logo, embossed like a crown, serif skyn. I knew that design because I made it, the mock-up she loved but never paid me for. Still, seeing it again stirred something gentle in my chest. Maybe, after everything, she'd reached out. The envelope was heavier than it looked. My name, typed, not handwritten. Inside, a perfectly worded invitation: "We'd love for you to join us at the grand opening, Friday at 6 p.m. Her font. Her name. My money. I smiled before I even realized it. Foolish, proud, hopeful. For a fleeting second, I imagined the two of us standing together again, laughing like we used to before ambition turned into armor. I held the card longer than I needed to, tracing the edges as if warmth could seep back through the paper. The house was quiet. Only the sound of the refrigerator humming and the faint ticking of the wall clock followed me as I set the invitation on the counter. I whispered under my breath, "She invited me." It sounded fragile, almost ridiculous out loud. That night, I made myself tea. Jasmine, my favorite, though the smell suddenly felt too sweet. I sat by the kitchen window and scrolled through my phone to distract myself from overthinking. It was around 9 when the app refreshed, and the screen filled with flashing lights, soft music, and the caption at serif skyn, "Today's magic." At first, I didn't understand. My brain tried to reorder the words, convince me it was a teaser, not the event itself. But there it was, the crowd, the laughter, the champagne. My mother, Vera, front row, clapping like her hands had never done anything but celebrate. Seraphine stood at the podium, radiant and self-assured, thanking everyone who believed in her vision. Everyone. But not me. I froze. The mug slipped from my hand, landing on the counter with a dull thud. The sound barely registered over the applause echoing from my phone. I watched the video again, then again, pausing on every frame. There was no empty seat waiting for me, no glance toward the door, no question in anyone's eyes about where I was. I wasn't running late. I was never expected. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too still. I pressed a hand to my chest, not because I was in pain, but because I wasn't sure there was anything left inside it. I scrolled through the comments, "So proud of you, Seraph. Family goals. What an amazing turnout. You deserve this." I didn't belong in their version of family. Not anymore. The rain began, tapping gently against the window pane. It made everything look softer, like the world was trying to apologize for her. I didn't move. My reflection in the glass looked calm, almost detached, but my fingertips trembled. I opened our old chat thread. The last message from her was months ago. "Can you cover this invoice for me? I'll pay you back next week." She never did. I typed a new message. Was the date on the invite a mistake? Delivered. Read. No reply. I waited. Maybe she'd call, pretend it was some oversight, send an emoji apology. But the phone stayed silent. I called her. Straight to voicemail. "Hey, it's Seraphine, leave a message." Her voice sounded professional now, distant. I hung up before the beep. The rain grew heavier. I sat on the couch, watching the reflection of water slide down the glass. This wasn't an accident. It was choreography. A dance of polite exclusion. And I was written out of the script before I even knew I was auditioning. At some point, I stood and walked to the hallway closet. The box was still there, blue tape across the top, label fading, brand assets, SKYN. I opened my laptop and searched for the Dropbox link. There they were, the original files. The logo sketches, the color palettes, the tagline, "Beauty begins with truth." My words. I stared at them, realizing how easily truth had been replaced by performance. The cursor blinked beside my file name, steady, rhythmic, almost taunting. I clicked one open, the mock-up of the first product packaging. My name was on the metadata. I remembered the night I finished it, late, tired, proud, and certain she'd make it right one day. She had made it right, for herself. Outside, thunder rolled quietly over the city. I leaned back in my chair, eyes burning, not from tears, but from the weight pressing behind them. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I thought about deleting the folder, erasing every trace of my contribution, pretending it didn't matter. But that would make me exactly what they wanted me to be, silent and invisible. Instead, I renamed the folder, Evidence. For a moment, I just listened to the soft hum of my laptop fan, the rhythm of the rain, the empty space between heartbeats. Healing never starts loudly, it happens gently, in the decision not to disappear. I picked up the invitation again, the one printed in gold ink, and ran my thumb across the date. It gleamed like a lie. I placed it back inside its envelope and tucked it into the drawer. Not as a keepsake, but as a warning. When the clock struck midnight, I closed the laptop and whispered to the quiet room, my name wasn't forgotten. It was removed. And I meant it, not as self-pity, but as a fact, carved cleanly into the night air. The house felt different after that. The hum of the refrigerator softened, the rain slowed. I could hear the faint echo of my sister's voice from the video still looping in my head, thanking everyone who made this possible. Everyone but me. I turned off the lights, letting the darkness settle around me like a new kind of peace. Maybe this was the first time I truly saw them for who they were, not villains, not saints, just people who found it easier to build their success on the silence of someone who wouldn't fight back. But I was done staying quiet. The rain had stopped completely. The window reflected my face again, tired, older, but still here. I whispered softly, almost kindly, I'm still here. The envelope glimmered faintly on the counter under the dim light. My pulse slowed, steady again. I reached for my cup, cold now, and finished the last sip. It tasted bitter, but honest. Morning light crept through the blinds, falling across the counter where that gold-embossed envelope still sat. The air in the kitchen felt heavy, thick with last night's silence. I didn't touch the invitation again. I simply turned away, poured myself coffee, and stared at the steam curling like something trying to escape. My head felt crowded, restless. So I did what I always did when the noise in my mind got too loud, I opened my laptop. The screen glowed against the dimness, a familiar blue that had comforted me through every lonely Sunday and sleepless night. But today, it felt like a spotlight on a crime scene. I typed my password and opened the bank portal. The cursor blinked, waiting. I searched for 90,000. There it was, 14 months ago. A transfer titled Seed Support. No rush. Proud of you. My chest tightened as I read those words. I had written them myself, thinking generosity could heal what years of distance hadn't. Back then, Seraphine had called late one night, voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. I just need a push, Evie. You've always believed in me. I had. God help me, I had. Now, looking at that memo line, I felt something close to nausea. Pride had turned to pity. And pity, I was learning, was just disappointment dressed up as love. I opened the shared folder she once sent me, her early pitch deck for investors. It loaded slowly, almost mockingly. Slide 1, our mission, beauty begins with truth. My tagline. My phrasing. My idea scribbled on a napkin one night after wine and sister talk. She hadn't even changed the font. I closed my eyes, trying to swallow the heat in my throat. I didn't cry. I just sat there, letting the betrayal settle like dust. Quietly, slowly, gently, it became real. The kettle whistled, sharp and sudden. I turned it off before it screamed. Some part of me wanted to pick up the phone, call her, demand an explanation. But another part, the older part, the one that had watched her charm our parents and everyone else into excuses, whispered, you already know the answer. I clicked into my email, searching her name. Hundreds of messages appeared, receipts, attachments, thank yous. But one subject line stopped me cold, want you as co-founder, not just silent support. I opened it. Her words spilled across the screen, glowing against the dark, I couldn't do this without you. You're my partner, Evie. My anchor. I remembered the night she sent it. She'd been sitting on my couch, hair in a bun, drinking my wine, calling herself a failure waiting for a chance. I'd laughed, told her she was dramatic, and she'd promised, when this works, I'll make sure you're standing right next to me. I believed her. Because I wanted to. The irony stung deeper now than it ever had. She hadn't even bothered to hide her betrayal. It was all here, time-stamped proof of how easily she rewrote history. My throat tightened. I whispered, I never asked for credit. Just honesty. The room answered with silence. I closed my eyes, and in that quiet, memory pulled me backward, to Napa Valley, when we were kids. Seraphine was 10, I was 15. She wore a crooked tiara from the dollar store, crying because the elastic snapped during her recital. I'd spent hours sewing it back together, threading the silver string through the tiny holes, my fingers raw. When she walked on stage, our mother said, "Look at her. She's a star." No one noticed the girl backstage, holding the extra tiara string, just in case. Even then, she was the spotlight. I was the curtain holding it up. Back in the present, I exhaled, steadying myself. The past didn't hurt anymore, it explained things. My laptop fan whirred louder, as if echoing my thoughts. I opened another folder, the one labeled brand receipts. Every invoice, every draft, every contract I'd helped her review. I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd poured into that company until now. It wasn't just money. It was time, belief, and the quiet labor of love that never made headlines. She turned all of it into currency for herself. I whispered softly, "You didn't just take my money, Seraphine. You took my belief in you." It came out steady, calm, but the ache underneath it pulsed like a bruise. I didn't delete anything. Instead, I highlighted every file and added a new tag, Seraphine, reclaim. It felt almost ceremonial, the way survivors sometimes mark a grave. Outside, the city hummed faintly, a dog barking, a truck passing, someone's laughter drifting through open windows. Life moved on while I stood still. Maybe that was the real cruelty of betrayal, it didn't pause the world, only your heart. The clock struck noon. I pushed back from the desk, walked to the kitchen, and poured the cold coffee down the sink. The smell of bitterness rose and vanished. A quiet kind of strength began to replace the sadness. Not loud or triumphant, just the awareness that I couldn't be erased if I refused to disappear. I turned off my computer. The screen went black, showing only my reflection. The woman staring back looked older than she remembered, but there was something steadier in her eyes. That steadiness, I realized, was not anger. It was resolve. The afternoon stretched long and still. I went for a walk to clear my mind, passing neighbors raking leaves, children chasing a stray basketball down the street. Ordinary lives. I envied them for their simplicity. But then again, ordinary people didn't learn to survive in families built on performance. When I returned home, a notification blinked on my phone. An email, press@sarafskin.com. The subject line made my stomach twist. "Thank you for your support at our private investor showcase." My support. The same word they used for PR volunteers and donors. My role had been rewritten once more, this time publicly. I opened the message. A glossy press photo filled the screen, Seraphine standing next to our mother, both smiling under perfect lighting. The caption read, "Family has always been our foundation." The irony nearly made me laugh. I closed the phone and set it face down. For the first time, I didn't feel like running or explaining or proving anything. I just felt done. My support was never meant to be invisible. But they'd learned to make me believe it should be. I sat back, letting the thought settle quietly. Healing didn't arrive suddenly, it happened softly, one truth at a time. The truth was this, I had given them everything, and they taught me to call it love. But love, without respect, is just a polite form of theft. The evening shadows grew long across the floor, turning the light gold. I picked up my mug, now empty, and whispered into the stillness, "That's over." The house didn't answer, but for once, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like release. The drive south felt longer than it should have. The highway curved endlessly, slicing through vineyards that looked the same as they had when I was a girl, green rows of order, everything neat, everything controlled. I hadn't seen my parents in months. Their text had come 2 nights ago, brunch this Sunday. "It's been too long. We'd like to see you." It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. By the time I reached the old house in Napa, the sky had cleared from gray to gold. The gravel crunched beneath my tires, the same uneven sound that once meant home. The front porch still had the wind chime I made in college. The copper had dulled, but it rang when the breeze moved through. For a second, I almost smiled. Almost. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish and something floral, lilac, maybe. The kind of scent that tried too hard to convince visitors everything was fine. The living room looked exactly the same except for one detail that stopped me mid-step, a large framed photo above the mantel. A perfect family portrait. Everyone was there, mother, father, Seraphine. Even the family dog, posed neatly between them. Everyone but me. I stepped closer, my eyes tracing the details. I recognized the frame, it was from last Thanksgiving. The one I had taken myself. I could still remember balancing the camera on the tripod, running to join them, laughing when the timer beeped. But in this photo, the space where I had stood was filled by a taller plant, a decorative fern. They used my hands to erase me, I whispered, the sound barely more than breath. The wall clock ticked above me, indifferent. I wanted to laugh, but the sound wouldn't come. It wasn't pain anymore, it was a strange kind of clarity. This was who they were, people who didn't cut you out all at once, but trimmed you away bit by bit until there was nothing left to notice missing. Mother's voice carried from the kitchen, cheerful and rehearsed. Evangeline. You made it. I was just saying to your sister how quiet it's been without you. I stepped into the doorway. Quiet, I repeated softly. That's one way to put it. She turned, smiling that picture-perfect smile I'd seen in the press photos. You look tired, darling. Work keeping you busy again? Busy enough, I said. I see you replaced me with foliage. Nice touch. She blinked, feigning confusion. What? The family photo. I remember taking it. Her eyes flicked toward the mantel for a second too long. Oh, that. It wasn't intentional, sweetheart. We just, well, the lighting wasn't good in that corner. You know how cameras are. Sure, I said. They have a habit of forgetting people, right? Before she could answer, Seraphine entered, heels clicking, phone in hand. She looked flawless, as always, every hair in place, every expression polished. Evie, you're early. You should have texted. I wasn't sure I'd be invited if I asked first, I said. She laughed, too loud. Still dramatic, I see. We're not doing that today, okay? Her tone was the same one she used with journalists who asked difficult questions, sugar-covering arrogance. I moved past her, toward the den. I'll wash up before brunch. The den was dim and quiet, sunlight catching dust motes in the air. On the side table near my mother's chair, a leather-bound journal lay half open beside her teacup. I knew better than to look, but curiosity, or maybe instinct, pulled me forward. The handwriting was unmistakable. Her cursive always slanted slightly right, confident, elegant. I read one line, then another. Seraphine is the child I was meant to have. My breath caught. I turned the page. Evangeline never needed me. She came out knowing too much. It's hard to love someone who reminds you what you've done wrong. For a moment, everything went silent. My fingers tightened around the spine until my knuckles ached. This wasn't a journal. It was scripture, her gospel of favoritism, written in ink that didn't fade. A floorboard creaked behind me. Evangeline? I closed the book carefully, setting it back in place. Yes, Mother? She stood in the doorway, a towel in her hands. Lunch is ready. Don't snoop through my things, dear. It's a bad habit. I met her gaze. I was just looking for a book. Her expression didn't change. Of course you were. At the table, everything gleamed, the china, the crystal, the silver forks aligned just so. Seraphine sat across from me, scrolling through her phone between bites of melon. My father cleared his throat as though preparing for a speech. Mother raised her glass, smiling at Seraphine. To the one who brings light to our family. The toast hung in the air like perfume, sweet, artificial, impossible to ignore. I didn't raise my glass. I simply stared at the fruit on my plate, cutting each slice into smaller pieces. The knife slid clean through, making no sound. Seraphine smirked. You could say, thank you, you know. For what? I asked quietly. For making Mom smile again. You've been so distant lately. I looked up at her, then at our mother, who pretended to be busy buttering her toast. Distant, I said. That's funny. I think distance was decided for me. Mother's tone turned crisp. Don't start, Evangeline. This is supposed to be a pleasant meal. It always is, as long as no one talks about the truth, I replied softly. My father shifted in his seat. Enough, both of you. Seraphine sighed dramatically. God, you're exhausting. Not everything's about you. I smiled faintly. I know. That's the point, isn't it? Her eyes flashed, but she said nothing. The rest of brunch passed in silence. Forks against plates, glasses clinking, the polite rhythm of people pretending they hadn't just drawn blood. When it was over, I helped clear the table. Mother stayed seated, sipping her coffee. You know, she said finally, your sister's doing amazing things. You could learn a lot from her about resilience. Resilience, I repeated. You mean self-preservation? She's had to work for everything she has. I wouldn't call using other people's money work. Her gaze hardened. She's family. And we protect family. Some of us more than others. She stood then, placing her cup in the sink. I don't know what you want from us, Evangeline. Gratitude? A medal? You've always been so self-righteous. I set down the plate I was holding. No. Just honesty. That's rich, coming from someone who left. I didn't leave, I said softly. You replaced me. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then she turned away, her voice clipped. I think it's time you went home. Seraphine watched from the doorway, arms crossed. Bye, Evie, she said, smiling without warmth. Don't be a stranger. The drive back felt shorter, maybe because I didn't look at the scenery. My hands gripped the wheel, steady, my heart strangely quiet. I didn't feel rage or grief anymore, just understanding. This was the history they'd chosen to keep. When I reached my car parked near the vineyard fence, I stepped out for a moment, letting the cool air fill my lungs. The house behind me looked peaceful, almost innocent against the blue sky. But I knew better. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to the photo albums. There it was, family holidays. Every image, every smile that once meant belonging. I hesitated, thumb hovering. Then I pressed delete album. It wasn't mine anymore. Maybe it never was. The wind stirred the vines beside me, whispering softly through the leaves. I stood there until the sound faded, until the ache in my chest quieted too. Healing didn't come suddenly, it happened softly, step by step. I turned toward the car, whispering, they can keep their light. I'll build my own. The driveway light flashed as I closed the trunk, the evening cool settling like an old shawl across my shoulders. I had planned to sort through the documents I had stockpiled, to organize proof and breathe, but the porch light caught movement, 3 figures framed in my doorway. My stomach tightened in a way that felt familiar, as if some old cord inside me had been plucked awake. They stood there polished and rehearsed, my mother with a practiced, concerned tilt to her head, my father quiet and unreadable, and Seraphine, beautiful in a way that had always felt like a performance. I unlocked the door because manners felt required, even when my gut said otherwise. Outside, the air was soft. Inside, their presence already occupied the rooms I had kept for myself. Gently. Mother stepped forward with a smile that did not reach her eyes. We thought perhaps a chat would help, she said, folding her hands as if arranging her words like napkins. Seraphine's smile was the same one she used when cameras were on her, the smile that smoothed questions into compliments. My father shifted his weight, looking anywhere but at me, and the silence between them felt like a script I had refused to learn. They did not apologize. They came bearing petitions, not remorse. Quietly. Seraphine held a small stack of papers, the edges crisp, the kind of legal-looking forms meant to settle things without conversation. We had some investor concerns, she began, voice light as air. They need documentation to avoid any trouble. It's simple, Evie. Just sign this and we move forward. My hands stayed in my pockets. I watched the way she softened the ask, the way she framed it as a favor, as an inclusion rather than a demand. Her words tried to make me a collaborator in my own erasure. Slowly. My mother added, voice thick with manufactured worry, we're all under pressure. You could help your sister. Show family support. The phrase, show family support, landed like a coin thrown at my feet. I stared at the papers in Seraphine's hand. The wording suggested loans labeled differently, disclaimers tucked where no one would read them unless they had to. My throat tightened and I heard, beneath the calm, the old tally of favors and unpaid balances. I remembered every midnight transfer, every whispered promise that was never kept. Softly. When I refused to take the forms, Seraphine's expression flickered. You always make people feel small, Evangeline, Mother said, and the sentence struck like an accusation sharpened by years. I felt the old tape around my chest pull tight. I had been practicing smallness for their comfort for decades. My voice landed low and even, because I had learned to speak like a tool, not a weapon. I made myself small so you could feel big, I said, and the words dropped into the air like carefully placed stones. They did not retract or apologize. Tenderly. Father's shoulders tightened, he looked away. Seraphine's eyes pinched, but she tried to laugh it off. Don't make this a thing, she said, like a woman calming a spill at a gala. We need to keep our reputation intact. Their vocabulary, reputation, investors, image, was always the laundering agent for their choices. The way they folded ethics into public relations had become their moral diction. My chest pulsed with something that was part anger and part grief, a quiet arithmetic of years. Gently. They placed the forms on my kitchen counter as if depositing goodwill. I watched them leave through the open doorway, an act more ritual than retreat, leaving their words hovering like smoke. Mother, with one last look, said, "Don't ruin this for her. She's finally building something." It was not a plea, it was a demand disguised as protection. The house closed behind them, and I stood in the doorway listening to the echo of the car fading down the street. Softly. I walked straight to the counter and picked up the papers they had left as if they were relics. The print was clean, the clauses distant, the language designed to make complicity bureaucratic. I thought of all the nights I had been the silent ledger of their crises, the bank of last resort. I had accepted that role often enough to know its costs, and I had paid them without protest. Slowly. My hands did not shake, my jaw felt anchored. I fed the stack into the fireplace, one sheet at a time, watching legal phrasing become ash and watching the small, controlled flames track their demise. Each curl of smoke took with it a line of their polite entitlement. It was not a grand gesture, but it felt necessary, a private act of decluttering the way one clears illness from a house. The paper turned black, then soft gray, and the flames consumed the last of their polite language. Gently. Burning the forms was not spectacle, it was a boundary set in a language they could understand. Words that once smoothed over debt and deceit were now nothing but heat and soot on the hearth. I did not celebrate. I did not cheer. I placed the ash in a tin and set it on the windowsill as if to mark what had been decided. Quietly. Afterward, the house seemed to breathe with me. The kettle boiled, a small domestic sound that grounded me to ordinary life. I made tea and sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around the warm mug. My thoughts were slow, unlaced from the adrenaline that had pushed me into action, and I allowed myself to feel the strange, steady pulse of being neither erased nor obliged. Healing seemed to arrive in small increments now, a soft reclaiming rather than dramatic absolution. Gently. Later that night I found myself drafting a message I did not send. It read, in even sentences, "I will not sign so you can rewrite the story of what I gave. I will not be made complicit in what you call success." I deleted it, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted my words to be precise when they mattered most. Precision felt like honor. Softly. Before bed, I placed the empty tin by the sink and watched the moonlight catch the ash. It glinted like something small and true. I thought of the way my family had tried to fold me into their illusions, expecting gratitude for my silence. Tonight, I had burned the invoice, and with it, a pattern that had almost become my life. It was not revenge. It was a refusal to be the ledger for a family ledger kept in their favor. Tenderly. As I turned off the lights, the house did not answer with recrimination. Instead it seemed to hold the quiet I had carved into it, like a new room I had claimed by simply being present. I lay awake for a while, hearing nothing but the soft tick of the clock and the slow rise and fall of my own breath. I had kept my line, I had not yelled. And in that measured silence, something unsteady inside me settled into a shape that could stand. Gently. The night stretched longer than usual. I couldn't sleep, no matter how many times I changed positions. The quiet wasn't comforting anymore, it pressed down, heavy, like a truth I hadn't faced yet. Somewhere between midnight and 3, I gave up on rest and walked to my office. The air smelled faintly of burnt paper, a trace of what I'd destroyed the night before. I turned on the lamp. Its yellow glow caught the dust in the air, swirling like thoughts I hadn't sorted. My bottom drawer stuck slightly when I pulled it open, the way old drawers do when they hide something. Inside were folders stacked neatly, labeled for every transaction, every favor I'd ever documented to keep my sanity. One folder stood out, the thick beige one with a faint coffee stain and the label SV, Equity. I hadn't looked at it since the transfer. Back then, I'd tucked it away, convinced there would never be a reason to doubt my sister. But my hands moved now with a quiet precision, as though they'd known this moment was coming all along. The folder smelled of paper and regret. Receipts, screenshots, a copy of the wire transfer, all filed neatly. But near the bottom, a sheet of paper caught my attention, crisp, heavier than the rest. It was a contract. I didn't remember signing it. My stomach tightened as I traced my finger along the signature line. It was my name. My handwriting. But it wasn't me. I read slowly. Each sentence carved deeper, an agreement transferring my voluntary contribution as a gift, relinquishing all claim to profit or ownership. The phrasing was legal poetry, cold, precise, final. Someone had copied my signature from an older form. I recognized the curve of the capital E, the looping tail of my surname. I felt something twist inside me, not surprise, not even heartbreak, just the cold realization of betrayal executed with skill. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then the anger came quietly, almost politely, as if asking for permission to exist. They forged my consent. My family forged me. I sat back, letting the chair creak under my weight. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator, the sound of a life continuing while mine paused. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I reached Juno Caldwell. It was 3:42 a.m. I didn't care. She answered on the second ring, voice rough from sleep. Evie? What's wrong? I found something, I said, trying to keep my tone even. I think they forged my signature. There was a pause. You're sure? I've been looking at my own handwriting for years. I'd know it anywhere. I'll be there in an hour, she said. Don't touch anything. Juno arrived in 40 minutes, wrapped in a gray coat, hair still damp from a hurried shower. She didn't waste time with sympathy. She pulled on her reading glasses and leaned over the desk, scanning the document. This isn't sloppy, she said after a few minutes. This was deliberate. Her voice was steady, but her jaw tightened. They even used the same notary stamp as the loan transfer. That's premeditated fraud. I swallowed hard. So it's real. Legally, I'm invisible. She looked up. Legally, they think you are. But they've left fingerprints all over this. Juno's hands moved efficiently, pulling out my receipts, cross-checking emails and dates. She typed notes into her laptop, each keystroke a quiet form of justice. When she opened the pitch deck Seraphine had used for investors, she frowned. Here. Look. She pointed to a page that listed the early investors, my name, right under the heading, Private Angel Donor. My investment had become her leverage. She had sold my trust to buy her success. She didn't just want to cut me out, I murmured. She wanted to cash me in. Juno's mouth tightened. She used you as collateral. That's not just betrayal, it's theft with polish. I leaned back, the anger no longer polite. I kept thinking she couldn't sink lower. That maybe she was just misguided. She's not misguided, Juno said. She's calculating. You need to decide how far you're willing to go. Her words hung in the air. I stared at the contract again. The ink seemed darker than before. How far? I repeated. All the way. She nodded once, like she'd been waiting for that answer. She reached into her briefcase and slid a fresh packet across the desk. We can start with a cease and desist. Or, her eyes met mine, you tell me how loud you want this to get. I looked at the red file on my bookshelf, thick and untouched for years. It was labeled, Receipts. I had always thought of it as insurance, something I'd never need. Tonight, it felt like armor. I pulled it down, dust motes dancing in the lamplight. When I set it on the table, the sound felt final. Let's make it echo, I said. Juno gave a small, grim smile. Now you sound like yourself. We worked for hours. By dawn, the table was covered in evidence, emails, contracts, timelines. The light turned silver through the blinds, cold and clean. I didn't feel tired. I felt awake for the first time in years. When Juno finally left, she placed a hand on my shoulder. You've been quiet for too long. Let's make sure your silence stops helping them. Her words lingered even after the door clicked shut. I walked back to the fireplace. The ashes from the papers I'd burned were gray, fine, soft as dust. I crouched down and stirred them gently with the poker. Among the remnants lay a scrap of unburned paper, one sentence still legible in my mother's handwriting: "We're family. Don't ruin this." I picked it up, felt the texture between my fingers. For years, that line had been the leash they used to pull me back, the anthem of guilt that made me choose peace over truth. But peace had never been real. It had only been their comfort purchased with my silence. I folded the scrap carefully, carried it to my desk, and opened a new file folder. The label maker clicked, printing neat letters: evidence, emotional leverage. I placed the paper inside and pressed it flat. They never thought I'd keep proof. That's how they built their version of the truth, on the assumption that I was too loyal to remember. I closed the drawer slowly, the sound of metal sliding against wood echoing softly in the room. The air smelled faintly of paper and smoke, a strange mix of ending and beginning. For the first time, I didn't feel erased. I felt written back in. The sun crept higher, painting the room in pale gold. I made another pot of coffee and stood by the window, watching the steam rise. Everything outside looked the same, the quiet street, the trees heavy with dew, but something in me had shifted. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It had edges now, purpose, direction. I thought of my mother's handwriting again, those curved letters that once meant authority. I thought of my sister's polished voice, smooth enough to sell lies to strangers. And then I thought of my own hand, steady on the paper, reclaiming what was mine. Healing didn't come suddenly. It arrived quietly, through the act of remembering who you were before they rewrote you. Morning arrived gray and wet, the kind of rain that blurred edges and softened everything it touched. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, reading the email Juno had drafted. The title on the document glared from the top of the screen like a verdict, statement of dissociation. My name underneath looked smaller than I remembered. Juno had typed it cleanly, without emotion, just the facts, that I had no further financial or personal association with Seraph Skyn, that I renounced all implied obligations. It was language meant to cut ties, the kind that ended stories neatly. But there was nothing neat about this. Outside, a delivery truck hissed past, spraying puddles against the curb. The quiet of my house broke for a moment, then sealed itself again. Juno's voice on the phone had been calm earlier. Seraphine's team sent one last request, she said. They want a signature confirming there are no outstanding claims. They're calling it a clean exit. I stared at the message and the attached document. I thought about the word clean and what it meant in my family. Clean was how they described anything that hid a mess under charm. Clean meant silence dressed in forgiveness. I opened the document anyway, letting my eyes trace the empty signature line. My hands didn't tremble this time. I picked up a red pen, drew one decisive line across the bottom, and wrote in block letters, "Declined. Do not contact again." I saved the file, attached it to the email, and hit reply. There's no clean slate built on dirty hands, I typed before clicking send. The moment felt quieter than I expected. Not relief, just completion. Like placing the final stone on a grave. By mid-afternoon, I was pacing the living room, my nerves tight but steady. The decision had opened a space inside me, and that space demanded to be filled with truth. I turned on my laptop again, opened a blank email, and began to type. Subject: to the investors who never knew the full story. The cursor blinked at me like a challenge. My fingers hesitated for only a moment before moving. The words came out clean, factual, precise, years of withheld truth finally finding oxygen. I attached the transaction history, the original logo files, screenshots of messages, even the metadata showing the first designs registered under my name. At the bottom, I included one screenshot of Seraphine's message asking for temporary name use. I read through it once, twice. It wasn't revenge. It was record-keeping. Before hitting send, I whispered into the quiet, they used my silence to build their empire. I'm done donating my silence. The mouse clicked. The sound was small but final. When Juno called later that afternoon, her tone carried something between disbelief and respect. You understand this doesn't just bruise her reputation, she said softly. It dismantles it. I know. Then you're ready for the noise. I've lived in their noise all my life, I said. This time, it's mine. Outside, the rain returned, softer now, more deliberate. I stood by the window, watching drops race down the glass, splitting and rejoining like decisions made and unmade. For years, I'd drawn the blinds at the first sign of weather, afraid to see reflection mixed with storm. But this time, I left them open. Let them see what I let them get away with for years, I murmured. The sentence didn't sound bitter, it sounded earned. That evening, I moved through the house as if reacquainting myself with a space that had been waiting for me. I made tea, washed the few dishes in the sink, stacked papers neatly on the counter. The ordinary rhythm of it calmed me. Healing didn't need ceremony. It needed motion. When I returned to my desk, the inbox notification glowed red in the corner of the screen. 47 unread messages. My pulse picked up, though my hand stayed steady. The first subject line read, urgent, press inquiry. The next, investor relations emergency. Then another, we need to talk. Please. Requests, demands, questions. The empire was cracking faster than anyone expected. I scrolled down, not opening any of them. The names on the sender's list blurred together, publicists, analysts, old family friends suddenly reaching out. Even Seraphine's name appeared once, short and sharp. What have you done? I didn't click it. I didn't need to. Instead, I opened my draft folder. I started a new message, addressed only to myself. You did what was right. You did what they counted on you never doing. I saved it without sending. Sometimes, truth didn't need an audience, it needed a witness. By the time the clock hit 9, the rain had stopped again. The house felt different, alive in its quiet. I powered down my laptop, the glow fading to black. My reflection looked back at me from the dark screen, tired but whole. The silence they had trained me to keep had become their loudest enemy. I turned off the light and stood for a moment in the doorway, the faint scent of rain drifting in through the open window. My pulse slowed. The storm outside had passed, but something inside me still hummed, steady, unafraid. It was the sound of a woman who had finally outgrown permission. Morning light cut through the blinds in thin stripes, brushing across the desk where I'd left the coffee from last night. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like wet asphalt and cold metal. I sat down, opened my laptop, and began checking emails, ready to ignore whatever noise still echoed from the letter I'd sent. Then the phone rang, an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. Ms. Ellery, a clipped voice asked. This is the fraud department from Columbia Federal Bank. We need to verify something unusual on your file. My pulse stumbled once, then steadied. What kind of unusual? There's a line of credit under your name, backdated 6 months. It's connected to a business entity called Seraph SKYN LLC. I leaned back slowly. The name didn't surprise me, it exhausted me. That's not my application, I said. Then we'll need to file a fraud report. You'll have to come in. I hung up and stared at the window, my reflection hovering faintly over the rain-speckled glass. She didn't just steal my money. She wore my name like a mask, the same way she'd worn every piece of me that made her shine. Juno arrived within the hour, her hair pulled back, her expression sharp and awake. She scanned the documents the bank had emailed me. She's bold, she said quietly. Or desperate. I watched her scroll through the data. She's both, I said. Juno looked at me over the rim of her glasses. She used your full legal name. This isn't petty. It's identity fraud. My stomach twisted, but not from fear. From fury. I had thought I'd reached the limit of what betrayal could feel like. I was wrong. There was always a deeper layer waiting beneath the last one. She didn't just forge my hand this time, I said softly. She forged my existence. Juno didn't answer right away. She tapped her pen against the desk, calculating. Let me check something, she said. Within minutes, she was pulling up email headers, cross-referencing addresses. When she stopped, her eyes narrowed. You're not going to like this. She turned the screen toward me. It was an inbox, a Gmail alias using my full name. It had been used to contact 3 major investors. The tone, the phrasing, the formatting, every word could have been mine. I read the messages one by one, my heartbeat tightening with each line. She had copied how I write. The cadence. The punctuation. Even the way I signed off, short, courteous, slightly detached. She mimicked how I breathe on paper, I whispered. The last email in the thread made me go cold. On behalf of my sister, she's the real visionary. My jaw clenched so hard I heard my teeth grind. Juno sat back, her expression unreadable. She's trying to rewrite the narrative before the story finishes, she said. She's trying to make me her ghostwriter one last time. For a moment, the silence between us was heavy. Then I stood up. We're going to her. Evie, Juno began, but I was already grabbing my coat. No warning. No phone calls, I said. We do it now. We drove downtown in a quiet fury, the city passing by in gray blurs. The law firm that represented Seraphine sat in a polished building of glass and marble. Inside, everything gleamed too clean, too sterile. I could hear the muted sound of keyboards and polite laughter from behind glass walls. At the front desk, a young receptionist looked up nervously. Can I help you? Tell Seraphine Voss that Evangeline Ellery is here, I said evenly. She'll know why. The receptionist hesitated, glancing at the computer screen, then at me. Do you have an appointment? I don't need one. Juno placed a hand on the counter, her tone firm. This is a legal matter. Make the call. 5 long minutes passed before the glass door down the hall opened. Seraphine stepped out, her smile fixed like porcelain. Evie, she said, too brightly. What are you doing here? Her voice had that familiar tone, sweet on the surface, layered with irritation underneath. I figured I'd save you the trouble of using my name again, I said quietly. Her expression flickered, just for a second. Excuse me? You used my name. My email. My signature. You're running out of ways to pretend I'm not part of this story. Juno handed her a sealed envelope. Cease and desist. You'll want to read it carefully. Seraphine's composure cracked. Her fingers trembled slightly as she took the envelope. This isn't necessary, she said. You're overreacting. You said that the last time you took something that wasn't yours, I replied. Evie, she said, soft and pleading, this is business. Things got messy. But we're sisters. Can't we fix this quietly? Quietly, I repeated, letting the word taste bitter. That's the problem. Quiet has been killing me for years. Her voice sharpened. You're being dramatic. Maybe, I said, stepping closer. But at least I'm finally being honest. She looked at Juno, then back at me. You really want to destroy everything I've built? I'm not destroying anything, I said. I'm just removing what you stole. For a second, the room stilled. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to pause. Then Seraphine laughed, short, forced, desperate. God, you always make yourself the victim. You can't stand it when someone else wins. I studied her face, the practiced expression of someone who had rehearsed guilt into grace. You didn't win, Seraphine. You just learned how to cheat without blinking. She flinched but covered it quickly. You think this makes you look noble? You're going to regret this. I looked at her the way you look at something you once loved and finally see clearly. No, I said. You are. Juno stepped forward, her tone professional again. You'll hear from us officially by morning. I suggest you get counsel outside this firm. We turned to leave, but Seraphine's voice followed us down the hall, sharp and desperate. You're ruining my life, Evie. I stopped at the door, looked back over my shoulder, and met her eyes one last time. I'm not ruining your life, Seraphine, I said softly. I'm just done pretending you didn't ruin mine. Outside, the sunlight was harsh against the glass. The air smelled like rain mixed with exhaust. Juno exhaled beside me, shaking her head. That was surgical, she said. It needed to be, I answered. As we walked to the car, a strange calm settled over me. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't tremble. For years, I had been the keeper of peace, the fixer, the one who stayed quiet so the family wouldn't fall apart. But today, the quiet had broken, and the sound it made was freedom. Back in the car, Juno handed me her phone. The press has already picked up your letter, she said. You're trending. I almost laughed. That's a first. You okay? She asked. I'm fine, I said, watching the city blur past the windshield. Better than fine. There was no triumph in my voice, just relief, cool and steady. I had stopped being part of their story. I had started writing mine. The days that followed moved like a slow earthquake. You couldn't see the cracks at first, but you could feel the tremor underfoot. I stayed mostly quiet, working from home, watering plants that had started to droop from neglect. It felt strange, after years of waiting for validation, to realize I didn't need to do anything anymore. I had already spoken. Juno called early Friday morning. You should see this, she said, her voice edged with disbelief. They moved the investor summit up a week. Live stream starts at noon. Of course they did. Seraphine had always believed in controlling the narrative. She must have thought a public event could wash the stains clean. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or pity her. By noon, Juno was sitting beside me at my dining table, laptop open, coffee cooling fast. The video began with a sweeping view of a hotel ballroom, spotlights, gold drapes, the hum of applause. Seraphine stood center stage, radiant as ever, wearing white like she'd just survived her own redemption story. "Good afternoon," she began, her smile bright enough to blind. "We're here to celebrate innovation, resilience, and family." Juno muttered under her breath, "Family, huh? That's rich." I said nothing. I watched as Seraphine spoke about integrity, about the importance of sisterhood, about overcoming adversity. She didn't mention my name, but she didn't have to. Every polished word was a mirror reflecting what she'd broken. Halfway through, a man's voice interrupted, firm, curious, professional. "Tobias Marin, one of the lead investors. Quick clarification," he said, holding a microphone. "Who designed the original brand identity deck in 2022? The metadata we received lists a different name, Evangeline Ellery." The sound in the room shifted. A collective breath, a ripple of discomfort. Seraphine's smile faltered just slightly. "Oh," she began, too quickly. "That must be a clerical error. My sister helped with early ideas, but the company's design team finalized everything." Tobias nodded slowly. "Interesting. Because our audit shows all digital assets were uploaded from an IP registered to Portland." For a moment, no one spoke. The moderator fumbled, the live stream camera panned awkwardly toward the audience. Then the video stuttered, and the feed went dark. The audio cut, but the damage screamed. Juno sat back in her chair, exhaling long and low. "Well," she said softly, "that's that." I watched the frozen image of Seraphine's smile on the screen. It looked brittle now, ready to shatter. "She always thought she could talk her way through gravity," I said quietly. "But lies collapse under their own weight." By evening, the internet had turned feral. My inbox filled with links, forwarded by acquaintances, journalists, even strangers. Hashtags began spreading, SKYN scam, sister silence, Ellery truth. Comment threads buzzed with speculation, some defending her, most dissecting her downfall with surgical fascination. I didn't post. I didn't comment. I just watched the house of cards fold in on itself, each headline another gust of wind. Seraph SKYN under fire for intellectual property theft. Family feud turns legal nightmare. CEO silent as investors demand transparency. I made tea and sat by the window. The steam rose quietly, curling into the dim light. It wasn't revenge. It was physics. What you build on deceit eventually caves in. Gently, but completely. By midnight, I turned off the TV, though every channel was replaying the moment Tobias asked his question. Juno texted, "Bankruptcy coming. You don't need to move a finger." The next morning, my phone was full of missed calls. I recognized the number before I even looked. Vera. Her first voicemail was sharp, clipped. "The neighbors are talking, Evangeline. Do you know what you've done?" The second came an hour later, her tone shaking. "This affects all of us. You're humiliating your sister. People think we raised monsters." The third was quieter, almost pleading. "Why are you doing this to her? To us?" I played each one once, then deleted them. She still hadn't learned. They never asked what Seraphine had done. Only what I had exposed. Later that afternoon, I sat in my car outside a coffee shop, scrolling through the news again. The headline was blunt, Seraph SKYN files for bankruptcy, assets frozen pending investigation. A photo accompanied the article, Seraphine exiting a courthouse, sunglasses hiding her eyes, a sea of microphones surrounding her. She looked smaller than I remembered. For a brief second, I felt something like pity rise in me, then fade. Not because I didn't care, but because caring had cost too much for too long. Compassion without boundaries was just self-destruction. The rain started again as I drove home. Portland's streets shimmered in the glow of traffic lights, and the sound of tires against wet pavement felt like an old lullaby. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sky had already turned violet with dusk. I didn't turn on the lights. I walked through the quiet house until I reached the back door, opened it, and stepped onto the deck. The air was cold and clean. Waves crashed faintly in the distance, the Pacific stretching dark and endless beyond. I pulled my phone from my pocket, scrolled to my audio files, and pressed play. My mother's voice filled the night air, still crisp, still haunting. Don't ruin this for her. I listened once, twice, then stopped at mid-sentence. The sound felt like an echo from a version of me that no longer existed. I deleted the file. The screen went black. I didn't ruin it, I said to the wind. They did. I just stopped covering the cracks. The ocean roared quietly in reply, its rhythm steady and patient. I stood there for a while, breathing in the salt air, feeling the cool mist against my face. There was no triumph, no vengeance, just peace shaped by exhaustion and truth. Inside, I lit a single candle on the counter, its small flame flickering softly. The light danced against the window, reflecting a version of me I barely recognized, older, sharper, free. It occurred to me that silence had never been my weakness. It had been my weapon, waiting for the right moment to speak. And now that it had, I didn't need to raise my voice at all. By Sunday morning, the inbox was finally empty. No more subject lines flashing across my screen like warnings. No more vague apologies from publicists. No more silence disguised as dignity from family. Just stillness. The kind that didn't ask for anything, didn't take anything. It simply was. I brewed tea and moved slowly through the kitchen. I wasn't in a rush anymore. I wasn't pacing. I wasn't checking updates. The world had moved on from the spectacle, and so had I. Serif Skyn was no longer trending. The only trending thing now was quiet, at least in my life. I sat at the table and opened the trust fund documents again. The papers were crisp, ink still slightly raised. I had read them 10 times already, but this time I allowed myself to feel the intention behind each clause. Isla Vos. Education-only disbursement. No parental access. No name except hers and mine. I hadn't given her everything. Just enough to grow without inheriting the lies. The doorbell rang mid-morning, but I didn't answer it. I waited until the sound faded, then opened the mailbox later. Bills. A flyer. And one envelope, small, crooked handwriting, no return address. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded twice. Crayon stick figures. 2 girls holding hands. One tall. One small. Below it, a note. Thank you for the piano lessons. I hope I'm making you proud. I stood there a long time, hand over my heart, letter fluttering in my fingers like a secret that had waited too long to be heard. She didn't know what they had tried to erase. She just knew I stayed. There was something profoundly healing in that. Not redemption. Not restoration. Just presence. And sometimes, that's what survival looks like, not louder, just longer. I placed the drawing in a frame and set it on the windowsill next to the rosemary pot that had barely survived winter. The colors caught the sun. It looked like belonging. The next afternoon, I stopped by the local hardware store. I didn't need much, just screws for a new shelf and a new house key. Something about changing the lock felt necessary, not because I was afraid, but because closure sometimes needed physicality. As I passed the newspaper rack near the checkout, a familiar name caught my eye. Former beauty mogul spotted alone in downtown diner. I picked up the paper and stared at the photo. Seraphine, sunglasses on, hair pulled into a loose bun, face pale without makeup, sitting alone with a coffee and no entourage. They were still rewriting the story, just not with my pen. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel vengeance. What I felt was cleaner than both. I felt distance. That night, I lit a candle and opened the windows wide, letting the spring air sweep through the house. I moved slowly, putting away the last of the folders, stacking old files and boxes labeled archived. The scent of lavender drifted from the candle, steady and familiar. Before bed, I wrote Isla a letter. Just a short one. Dear Isla. You are loved. You are strong. You are not what they expect. You are more. I'll always be in the front row, even if you don't see me. Love, Evie. I didn't send it yet. I folded it and placed it inside the piano bench. When she was ready, it would be there. The next morning, before the sun had fully broken over the horizon, I took the stone I'd found by the river, smooth, round, pale gray. With a black marker, I wrote my name in bold, slow strokes, Evangeline. I walked to the beach. The water was cold and endless, the tide pulling soft ribbons across the sand. I stood there for a long time, watching the waves roll in and out, each one carrying something away. I didn't bring the stone to throw it in rage. I brought it because I needed to release the name, not abandon it, but honor it. It had been twisted, stolen, used. And now, I was giving it back to the ocean, letting it rest. I held the stone gently in both hands, whispered, I don't need it back. I just needed to know it was mine. And then, slowly, I let go. The splash was quiet. Not dramatic. Just real. I stood there until the sun finally cracked the sky open, until the light reached my toes. Then I turned around and walked home. Sometimes the people who silence you the most are the ones who say they love you the loudest. But love without respect? That's just another form of control. What would you do if your own family tried to erase you from your own story? Let me know in the comments. And if you felt something from this story, if it reminded you of someone, or something you've survived, subscribe. Because this channel? It's for voices like yours. For stories that refuse to stay silent.